Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jodi Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper.
I'm thinking about another time when I was, because I mentioned it earlier, met the head of JPL on a tour coming back on a plane from Tennessee, Nashville, because that's the main hub there in the area. And the head of NASA, had been over there at the space camp, which is in Alabama.
Huntsville.
Huntsville. Exactly. And so he had been, whatever he'd been doing, I don't know. And so we happened to be sitting together on the plane. And so we struck up a conversation. He had recognized me. Oh, you're the American guitarist. Yeah. I go, yeah. And I said, very glad to meet you, doctor. And so we were talking. And I didn't rail at him, but I said, NASA really blew it. And he goes, what? Excuse me, sir? And I said, yeah. I go, I know your whole budget is screwed. I know it because I've been, I represented America here and there and did all that stuff and a goddamn diplomatic party every other night, and they're all getting 3 sheets of the wind. And so he said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, you had captured the hearts and minds of not just the American people, but the entire world. I go, when you landed people on the moon, it was, if you would have gone into a bar and said something against the American space program, you would have started a fight, because that's how deep the feeling was, and that we had achieved such a wonderful and an honorable thing, right? And a wonderful thing to even think, how many thousands of years did people dream of going to the moon or to Saturn or something, or Mars? I said, well, it took American taxpayers to do it, and the threat of Soviet domination. I said, it wasn't humanity that got there. It was Americans that got there, which is very different than most people think of it. So would other countries have gotten there? I doubt it. They wouldn't have the money, first of all. So anyway, so now I'm talking to him and I said, you blew it. He said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, the heroicism, the romanticism, the greatness of what your achievement was is now been stripped out of everything, because you're just sending probes out and there's no people. Where's the hero? Where's the heroine? Right? Where are these people? You lost the American. They wouldn't even, after 2 landings on the moon, the viewership went like to nothing, because everyone was bored. So, well, you have to have a new project. You have to now start a colony there, or maybe start doing the Mars, whatever.
Sometimes science isn't as exciting as people think.
That's right. So he invited to me, and he gave me a tour of JPL. Well, Carl Sagan was going to be there. But unfortunately, Mr. Sagan had contracted cancer, as everyone knows. And so he was going through chemotherapy and all that. He looked terrible. And I met his friend there, and his friend was literally crying as we're on the tour. And I said, how is Dr. Sagan? And he literally burst out in tears. And he said, he's dying, Jonathan. I said, that's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. He's such a distinguished gentleman. And so I toured all over JP. He gave me a private tour, and I saw the Cassini probe as it was being made, the one that went to Saturn that was nuclear powered. And the big whoop-de-doo was, it's going to explode and shed, nuclear radiation everywhere. I doubt it. So, and at that time, and of course, now Cassini's mission is ended. They finally sent it into, I think, Saturn, and it's to get atmospheric readings or that. So you meet people and go places that you possibly when I got on that flight, I didn't think I was going to meet the head of JPL. He's the head of
Yeah.
rocketry. And so many wonderful adventures like that,
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds
I
of them.
love that music is
Yeah.
such a universal language for everybody and that it makes it possible to communicate with everyone anywhere. Why don't we move on to the power of sound, which obviously has made a really big impression in your life, and how it makes a mystical impression. So, I mean, you've had a lot of experience with music and various places around the world, and I'm curious, in your experience, which location may have touched you the most sound wise.
All of them. They're all great.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people say, what's your favorite auditorium? And my answer would be, well, was a great one in Targu Mureš in
Mm-hmm.
Romania, and there's also a great one, and, on and on and
Sure.
on.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to pick and choose. What's your favorite piece?
Yeah, it's a hard
you know,
question. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
So
beyond that, it has the power to heal as well. And so I'm thinking maybe one of those places that you were in kind of made that connection. It is, yeah.
to your point, like about the power of
Hmm.
healing, to the point, I played in Bombay. They call it
Hmm.
Mombasa now. And it was at their National Theater, which is kind of like the National Theater in DC. It's like almost a
Hmm.
replica. It's very similar. And I'm playing a concert there. And I received a letter weeks later after I had come back home. And my manager had gotten this letter and he called me up. He said, Jonathan, look at this. And a man had come into the auditorium and he was going to kill himself.
Mm.
And he was on the brink of suicide. And he heard the concert and he decided not to kill himself. And the title of the letter, it said Shanti, which is kind of like
Hmm.
peace and that. And he wrote, I heard your concert and decided life was worth living. And so in a way, to your point, music healing, I think that's an example of music healing.
Definitely.
Uh, uh, and my manager later on, when we met in person, said that was worth the whole tour. And I said,
Hmm.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Music really does
I go,
touch people very deeply.
save that person's life.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. So you've been doing this a long time and you have a fantastic repertoire from, what I've heard and uh, but
Thank
you
you.
started on the guitar because it was the most difficult instrument you could pick up. Is that
Well,
accurate?
I didn't know it at the beginning. I didn't know it at the
Yeah.
time, but Paganini, it was either Paganini or was it was Heifetz, the great violinist. Uh, the violin is the most difficult instrument in the world to play with the exception of the classical guitar, is his
Okay.
quote. Now, why is that? Because there are most instruments of the orchestra tuned in thirds are monophonic. For
Hmm.
instance, the oboe, the clarinet, uh, the all the brass instruments, the trumpet, the cornet, the tuba, whatever. Each one of those is a single
Hmm.
voice. I used to teach, believe it or not, and when I was at the Newport Institute of the Arts, and after that, I used to teach violinists occasionally because there's
Okay.
crossover. The guitar is not a string instrument. What are you talking about,
Please
Jonathan?
explain. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Here's why. The stringed instruments like the viola, even the ancient Baroque ones, the old da gamba, all right, are bowed,
Hmm.
right? Everyone knows that. And that is a stringed instrument being bowed. The guitar is actually plucked in a way. It's a percussion instrument.
Ah.
Now that sounds strange to people,
I
but
don't
you're
know. I get it.
hitting the
Yeah.
string. Yeah. So the classifications are
Hmm.
muddled in most people's mind. And who cares, right? But the piano is the same way. The piano has a hammer that goes like that on the string. The harpsichord has a pincher that is plucked.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What do you do on the guitar? You actually pluck the string or hit it like a hammer in a way. So in a certain way of thinking, the guitar is not the stringed instrument that everyone thinks it is. On the other hand, what makes the guitar so difficult? The double stops, the triple stops, the quadruple stops. What does that mean? It means like a guitarist would say a dyad, a triad, a chord,
Mm-hmm.
they would say. A simple guitarist would say a chord. But the violin, if you know, occasionally is using 2 notes at once, occasionally 3 notes at once. Its max is 4 because that's how many strings it has. And also it's tuned in a different voicing. It's tuned in thirds, where the guitar is tuned in fourths, and with 1/3 between the G and the B. And what does that do? It sets up that the voice leading has to have a different fundament, because that's why those voicings are so different than other instruments. So the difficulty lies technically in doing constantly dyads, triads, and tetrachords and that, as well as the melody. You're doing 2 and 3 things at the same time. A lot of people saying, did you overdub that? I go, I've never overdubbed anything in my life.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So I go, no, it's just, how do you do it? I go, I sit in front of the microphone and play. People say, oh, the difficulties of recording. I go, here's how difficult it is. Jonathan, we're ready. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you must rehearse
Right?
like crazy. But
Of
yeah,
course. Of
I
course.
mean, of course, because
Right.
you don't want to sit down
Yeah.
and waste people's time if they're recording you. You want to know what you're doing, obviously.
And to, well, waste your money.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's
right?
expensive.
And-
Yeah.
Yeah. But the difficulties lie in that I'll give a secret lesson to your guitarists that are listening on this,
Sure.
maybe. It is not by the application of energy that a sound is produced, but by a release of that energy. Just as it was in making the bomb. The atomic bomb is not an impact bomb. You can drop it from a plane and let it land. It won't explode. What happens is there's a beryllium sphere, and they have to send all these spikes, so to speak, to split that. And what happens? The energy is released. And it's very inefficient, by the way. It's only like 3% of the energy. So it's very inefficient. So in executing a passage on the guitar, to that exploding sound that you hear, people ask, how do you create that? And my answer is, I release the energy. But it's not enough for me to just tell you that. To be able to do it is different. It's like, Michael, the great swimmer, how do you win? I swim fast.
Yeah.
That's how I win. I swim faster than anybody. And there's all sorts of ways I do that.
Yeah.
Right? My body is perfectly designed, those lats that he has, right? I go, his body is the most perfectly designed swimming body I've ever seen. But in essence, what does he do? Swim fast. Yeah. So that's kind of a secret, and how some of those sounds are produced and why the guitar is so difficult. All right. The classical guitar. I'm not talking about, it is easy to play a few chords in many pop songs. Anybody can do that. But to master the instrument is a totally different thing. To play the Bach chaconne in D minor, okay? To play the Grand Hota by Tárrega, to play these towering masterpieces. So to do that requires a lot of discipline and skill, and that's why at 14 I was depressed.
Yeah. There's a lot to learn.
Because I knew, ever seen bales of hay driving through, what was it, Cheyenne, Wyoming, was it? I was looking at bales of hay, giant bales of hay, and I thought, somebody's going to have to load that onto a truck.
Yeah.
Think about the labor.
Yes. Yeah.
Somebody's going to have to pick that up and put it on the bed of a truck
There
somewhere.
is a lot involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one can say, I, you know, all you did is this. Try to load all those
Yeah.
bales of
Yeah.
hay on the truck.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
And you've added materially to classical guitar repertoires as well. So how have you done that?
One of my things when I was in college, when I was studying with Frederick Node and at the UCI and Pepe Romero privately at home in his house and doing master classes with Christopher Parkening, all these great artists, I knew that I loved the Spanish masterpieces. I loved the Bach transcriptions of Segovia. I loved all these things. And at the same time, I said, is there any goddamn American music? Right? In other words, yeah, there's some Gershwin, there's some Scott Joplin, there's, things like that. But I adapted many, many pieces, American folk songs. I adapted the Bond themes. Well, that's English, of course, but the themes from the Bond movies. And when I say American folk songs, I created arrangements, medleys, magnum opuses. Uh, the film score of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, I transcribed into a 11-minute piece.
Wonderful.
So those are all different genres of music and more akin
Mm-hmm.
to what I grew up with. It's not that I studied composition and arranging and in a very deep way. Like I said to you, maybe it's very easy for me to write a string quartet or a brass quintet or an orchestral piece. That's nothing compared to
Mm-hmm.
arranging for classical guitar or
Yeah.
adapting because the technical problems are so massive. Segovia found that to be true when he commissioned wonderful composers to write Ponce and Villalobos and many, many, Mamoy de Falla, on and on and
Mm-hmm.
on. And even people so erudite and so wonderful, great, even they had to write through him, meaning Segovia as a player, because their knowledge of that instrument was limited. But fortunately, I have both
Mm-hmm.
backgrounds, the orchestral background, the composition background, the arranging in that, and the classical guitar. So I've added many pieces. I have albums that contain heretofore never transcribed or adapted to the classical guitar
Mm-hmm.
pieces. Just type Jonathan Taylor guitar into Google and you'll find all sorts of stuff. And also, if that app has tons of stuff on it. And I forgot to mention it was free. Did I mention it was free?
Yeah, you mentioned
I
that.
forgot.
Yeah.
I don't know why I
Oh,
forgot that.
okay. Well, we'll mention it more.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll mention it more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to sort of end on this note, and I want to ask you this because this is a big question. Why do you think sound is important?
Because it's one of the ways that we detect the outside world, and it frees us. Our senses free us from ourselves.
That's a good point.
Yeah. What were we when we didn't have all this instrumentality like you and I are using now, talking across thousands of
Mm-hmm.
miles? God, I remember going to Paris for the first time and that the underground cable across the sea, right? It was so echoey, so bad. And now look at this. But what do we do with our senses? That's our
Mm-hmm.
feelers. That's how we navigate the world. That's how we perceive the world. And there are many scientists now that think, space-time is just a construct, even though all of our technologies are based on those
Mm-hmm.
things, but they also think at this point that it is just a construct that we use our ears, we use our eyes, we feel pressures, right? And we use it to adapt and to master our environment.
Yeah, very good point. And of course, music is a universal language, so a way that we can communicate even if we don't understand each other's languages. I love that
And
portion of it.
why did that guy not kill himself? You
Yeah.
see? What was it in that concert, some piece, whatever it was? What was it that flipped him to the other side where he said, you know what? Life is worth living. Was it beauty?
Something like that,
Was
I'll
it
bet.
glory?
Yeah.
Was it, I found a
Mm-hmm.
path? who knows? I don't know, and I don't claim to know.
Yeah.
But I can say this, that without the music, I think life would be way worse off.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely important in our lives. So what are you working on now that you can talk about?
Right now I'm filming out here in Boulder City, Nevada. It's about 30 miles from Vegas. I go back in Orange County, and I'll probably be filming there too in a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm working on that, learning new pieces, transcribing new pieces. I'm transcribing Take 5. That's not Brubeck. Who is the other guy? And transcribing different pieces.
Wonderful.
And that's what I'm doing.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So if people want to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
Just get the app.
Get the app. Okay. Yeah. Did we mention it's free?
It's free.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that. I don't know what's the matter. I'm forgetting so many things. Early Alzheimer's.
Do you have a URL or they can just look for Jonathan Taylor?
If they just type Google Play for Android users, Apple Store for iPhone users, Jonathan Taylor, no break, Jonathan. The name can be spelled 2 or 3 ways. I'm sure people have done that. And if they want to hear other stuff, they can type Jonathan Taylor guitar into Google. Make sure to put the guitar in. Otherwise, you will get a wonderful black football player. And even though I look like a black football player, I am not a black football player. And he's a wonderful athlete. I hope to meet him one day.
Okay. Well, we'll put that out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll see.
Put that out there.
It's out in the world now. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been a true pleasure, and I appreciate your time so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.